Let's paint a cardinal in the snow. Hi art family, it's Dena Tollefson and I'm so glad you're here today. In today's painting video, I'll demonstrate for you how to paint a beautiful male Northern Cardinal bird using watercolor paint and watercolor pencils in a layered watercolor technique of wet and wet and then wet into dry, and I'll go through and explain how all those methods work. And mastering color layering is actually a fun skill. You can do it and it's super easy to do. So in today's video, I'll give you some tips and tricks on how to do color layering, and even a beginner can do this. So it'll be a lot of fun. So you saw me getting started by using the Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarelle watercolor pencils on dry paper technique. And then I'm going in now here with also a dry paper and applying the watercolor, the tubed watercolor that was mixed with a little bit of water, going in and then taking this tubed watercolor, and this is now we're going to use some of the Winsor & Newton permanent magenta, describing the cardinal on the shadow side with some of this a little bit darker color. So the light side of the cardinal, where the sun is shining on the cardinal, we're using the kind of orange color to describe him. And then in the shadow areas and in the areas where the sun is not showing, we'll use a darker color, a little darker reddish purplish color to describe this bird. Now you may have heard the terms wet into wet or wet on wet for watercolor, or wet on dry. What that means is it has to do with what is the state of the watercolor paper when you're putting the water on. So what you see here is a wet on wet technique. So the paper is a little bit wet, and so what will happen is the color that you apply on top will travel. And that's an important technique because normally if you're just putting, like here in this little section here down at the bottom, the paper is dry, you'll notice that where I'm putting it, it stays put. So that's an interesting little thing about watercolor, is it will only move if it has water to travel on, or water as a vehicle to move. If you put it on the dry paper, it will just stay right where you put it. This painting is for the Snow Art Challenge I'm hosting here on my YouTube channel. I'll be making a playlist on my channel of all the participants who create artwork featuring snow or including snow in their art, and those who use the hashtag. So I hope that you'll watch all the other videos from the Snow Art Challenge artists and show them some love. So we're all one art family. So if you want to learn more, I've got a video, and I'll put the link for that video in the description of this video so that you can see the playlist and also learn more about how to do the Snow Art Challenge if you aren't already participating. So here's a great example showing the differences between wet and wet on dry. On the undertail covert area, I first used some plain water and got that wet, and you saw when I put the paint on, it just kind of dispersed everywhere. And now here on the back side, the nape of the cardinal and down below, the paper is totally dry. I used a heat gun on it to dry it. And where I'm putting this color, it is not moving, it's just staying where it is. So I'm now coming back with just a wet brush and then letting these colors mingle. So adding in now a little bit of this Winsor orange. You can see it's mixing in with the other colors that were already there in that wet on wet. So now applying neutral tint, you can see here this layering process. So we had the Museum Aquarelle color below, and then layer after layer of the neutral tint. When you build up these layers, you can get really deep, rich, dark colors. So let's do a little wet on wet now, just using plain water and the large cat tongue brush. We'll now go in with a little bit of the French ultramarine and just putting that on, and watch how that color just kind of travels across where I had pre-wet the paper in this wet on wet technique. So let's describe a little bit of the snow, and now add also on top of that, while the paper is still wet, add a little bit of the neutral tint and watch how that will disperse and just kind of slowly fade into the other color. Had I put that with dry paper, it wouldn't be moving. So you can see that the paper is wet below and it will just travel. Now let's further dilute this and make a very watery, thin, light color and apply that to the dry paper. So now watch how if you put this color on, it's just going to stay where it is, and then you can come back later and soften that with a wet brush. Now again, wet onto wet, so the colors will disperse. And I'm going to come in with some Chinese white on the dry beak and let those layers just build up, continue to build up the layers. Another interesting fact about watercolor is it will tend to dry lighter in color than what it is when it's wet. So now that my watercolor on the shadow area has dried, I'm realizing that I've made it too dark. So I am going back and taking a cloth, re-wetting that area, and then lifting the color out. So that's a little trick. If you do a thing like what I did and you got a little exuberant with your color, you can always go back and apply a little bit of water and then lift it off with a dry cloth. So let's get our pencils nice and sharp here. I'm using my Derwent sharpener and getting a nice, really great edge. And now doing additional layering by using the Museum Aquarelle watercolor pencils. You can either use them dry or you can use them wet. So that's kind of a fun little thing about them is you can get the tip of the pencil wet with either your brush or just dip it in water and then apply it to your painting. Or you can do like what I'm doing here, applying it dry and then taking a paintbrush and activating it. Just activating those little bits of area that we've used the watercolor pencil on. And what I like about that is it gives you another textural element to your painting when you combine both watercolor pencils and tubed watercolor. Alright, so I'm looking at my painting and feeling like I can maybe add a couple last bit of detail here, a couple little speckles of Chinese white for snow. And let's go in and sharpen and get a little bit more detail for depth with the neutral tint. Alright, now it's time to take off that masking tape and reveal what we've got below. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you'll come back again. So until next time, it's Dena Tollefson. All my best to you. Bye-bye.